Today we're going to be learning Yoma Daf Pe Aleph. Today's daf is sponsored with love by Arlie and Kenny to Tamara Katz. Wishing you a very happy birthday. Thank you for providing us with the inspiration to learn the daf, which we can't wait to pass on to our daughter, Millie. Okay, we are going to start just reminding everybody, if you're in Israel, living here or visiting, please sign up, register for one of the Siyumim on the Hebrew side of the site, and on the English side, register for the Zoom. Everybody is welcome anywhere around the world to join us on the Zoom. It'll be great shiurim and siyum together. So we will now get started on our daf. We're starting at the top. From the words Amar Rav Shizbi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. What we started with yesterday was a bunch of comments about eating that's not really considered eating, not a beneficial type of eating, whether it's achilat asa or you're chewing on something, chewing on grains or something of the sort. So then it's not considered eating, you're not benefiting. So that means Yom Kippur, you wouldn't be liable. And for Truma, you wouldn't have to pay back the Kohen the added fifth, which really is a quarter, but a fifth in the words of the Torah. The way they calculate it, it comes out to a quarter. We'll get to that when we talk really about Truma in depth. Rav Shizbi says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Zar Shabalash Shizifim Shel Truma. We have one last case here. A non-Kohen. Here's a very interesting one. The other one's okay, kind of boring. Fine, you do something that's not really eating. We get it. Now we have a case where I eat food. Okay, then I ate Shizifim of Truma. Hikian v'achalan achel. I vomited it after I ate. Okay, maybe someone bulimic, I don't know, but for whatever reason, I vomited it. And then achalan achel. Okay, I told you it was a bit of a strange case. Somebody else comes and eats what I vomited out. Okay, obviously I vomited out in one piece, I guess, or something. Now, according to this, who's responsible for what? Did I eat it? Because I vomited it out, right? What's important? The action, I did an action of eating and then I vomited. Or is it the totza'ah? The fact that in the end, it didn't go down into my body. So we rule, Rishon Mashalem Keren V'chaj. I did what's called a ma'aseh achila. I ate it, so I'm liable. It doesn't matter what happened after. I ate it, and therefore I'm liable. But what about the second person who came along? Sheni, he also ate, right? We were both non-Kohanim. We weren't allowed to eat truma. Well, first of all, I already paid the Kohen. He doesn't need to pay the value of it. But what he did was, that object, once I ate it, it was no longer food or edible, even though someone else came along and ate it. But I could have used it for burning purposes, right? To make a fire. We've learned in Masechet Shabbat all sorts of things they use for fire. So I could have used it to make a fire. So he has to reimburse me the amount that it was worth in the end. So he reimburses me for that value. That's all he has to do. Okay, so again, you see that by eating something that you're not but it's not considered food. It's not considered food, and therefore he's not liable for the truma or anything else. Back to our mission. Someone who eats and drinks, they do not combine together, food and drink. So if I eat a little bit less than a kotevet of food and I eat less than a malol of mav, but together theoretically those could equal a full shiur, we don't combine them. Montana, who does this go by? Meaning, not everybody necessarily agrees with this. Amar Chisda b'machloket shnuya. It's a machloket. Rabbi Yoshua, and our Mishnah follows Rabbi Yoshua. Ditnan says in the Mishnah, and now our topic's going to be something else. Klal Amar Rabbi Yoshua. Kosher tumato v'shiuro shaveh mitzdareh. The topic is tumah. In order for something to be tameh, right? You to become tameh, you need a kizayit of something, right? Depending on what it is. Could be for sheretz ka'adasha, for a nevela and a dead person's kizayit. There's different shiurim for different things. Can you combine shiurim? Also, when it comes to tumah, there's different levels of tumah. One type of tumah is your tummy for the day, like sheretz or a dead body. Carcass of an animal. That's tumah for a day. If you come in contact with a dead body, it's going to be tummy for a week. So the question is, which things can combine, which things can't? Rabbi Yoshua says, if tumato v'shiuro shaveh, like for example, you have two parts, like a half an adasha, half a lentil's worth of a sheret, and another half a lentil's worth, right? Those two can combine. Or two half zayits of a nevela, of a dead animal. because their level of tumah is the same and their size is the same, then we can combine them. But basically, it's going to say anything else doesn't work. So what is the anything else? Tuma tova lo shiuro. It has the same level of tuma, like a nevela and a sheretz are both tummy for a day. But lo shiuro, but each one is a different requisite amount that's going to make you that's going to have tuma, right? One is right a nevela, a kazayit of a nevela makes you tameh if you come in contact with it. But an adashav, a sheretz makes you tameh, so they don't have the same requisite amount. If it's shiuro velo tumato, like a nevela and a dead body, both are matame kazayit. If there's less than a kazayit of a dead body or less than a kazayit of a carcass of an animal, you won't become tameh nevela by coming in contact with them. So they both have the same requisite amount, but lo tumato, but the tumah of mate will be 7 days, and the tumah of a nevela will be only 1 day. Or lo tumato velo shiuro. How about sheretz and a dead body? Sheretz is a lentil, the size of a lentil. The mate is the size of a kazayit, of an olive. The mate is 7 days and the sheretz is 1 day. So they have nothing in common. All those three options aim with stuffing. That's Rabbi Yeshua. He basically says you can't mix anything that's any different from the other. So obviously he's going to say that food and drink don't mix. What they don't tell you here, but what's obvious is the rabbis disagree. And they think when it comes to tumah, all of these combine. So therefore the assumption is they would say also by our Mishnah, they would disagree with our Mishnah and say that all of this combines. So now, Rav Nachman Amar, afilu tema Rabbanan. So this was Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says, our Mishnah, who says food and drink don't combine, is a machloket, and it's Rabbi Yeshua's opinion. The rabbis disagree. Comes from Nachman, and he says, no, I think everybody agrees about our Mishnah. Afilu tema Rabbanan. I'm going to explain the rabbi's opinion, even according to our Mishnah. How so? Ad kan lo ka'amre Rabbanan hatam ela linyan tuma. This shame tuma chadi. The reason why the rabbis there said we could combine everything is because it's all got the same name to it. It's all called tuma, impurity. So it doesn't matter if it's 7 day, 1 day, lentil, kazayit. It doesn't make a difference. It's all the same name. Aval hacha mishum yituva datahu. We keep saying this over and over again. The reason for Yom Kippur is Yishuv Hadat, right? Having you have this calm, satiated sense. The hi lo miyat v'data. But eating less than a shiur and then drinking less than a shiur is not going to give you that kind of satisfaction. It just doesn't work that way. Why they say this, I don't know. But the main point is he's saying there's something different operating here. It's not the same general laws. It's not this one general category. We're trying to achieve something, right? The requisite amount is to get us, it's to say, at this amount, you have a certain feeling in your body. You're not going to get that if you eat a little and drink a little. The combination of eating and drinking doesn't work that way to give you Yishuv Hadat. Therefore, it's not going to work. So we have a machloket between Rav Chisda and Rav Nachman about whether the fact that food and drink don't combine is a machloket among Tanaim, or whether it's agreed upon everybody. This machloket, Rav Chisda, Rav Nachman, the exact same machloket, and we're going to read word for word the same machloket that Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan had. It means not only were the Babylonians had a disagreement about this, also the Chachamim in Israel also had the same exact disagreement. Rish Lakish says it's a machloket, and our Mishnah with Rabbi Yeshua, Ditnan Klal Amar Rabbi Yeshua Vichule, they spare us reading us the whole rest of it. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Filu Tema Rabbanan Ad Kanu Ka'amre Rabbanan Hatam Ela Linyan Tuma Aval Hacha Mishum Yituva Data Hu V'Hai Lo Kamiyat Vedat. He said the exact same thing. There's a difference between Tuma and Yishuv Hadat by eating, and therefore it's not the same thing, and therefore even the rabbis would agree, and therefore our Mishnah seems to be agreed upon by everybody according to Rabbi Yochanan. So there's a machloket which Lakish Rabbi Yochanan matches up with Rav Chisda Rav Chisda Rav Nachman. New Mishnah. This sounds like a Mishnah out of Masechet Shabbat, and we're going to have a lot of comparisons to Shabbat today. Achal v'shata b'he'elei mechad. If you eat and drink in one lack of knowledge, you didn't know it was Yom Kippur today, or you knew it was Yom Kippur, you didn't know you can't eat and drink on Yom Kippur, right? Hard to imagine, but let's say you didn't know. And then you ate and drank a few times during the day. So this is what you call, it's something that you get karet for if you did it intentionally. You do it unintentionally, you're supposed to bring a korban chatat. How many do you have to bring? On every time you ate, every time you drank, or just one for the whole thing? So they say This is what we call ha'elem echad. You didn't know, and it was one action, because we view achilah and shtiya as one. So therefore, eno chayav el chatat echad. You're only liable to bring one korban chatat. But achal v'asam l'chat, there's two things you get karet for, and we're going to see the verses inside today. It says very explicitly in the text of Vayikra, chapter 23, in verses, we'll see 27 to 30. We're going to see it talks about what's forbidden to do, and it talks about inoy, tanu, nafshetachem, and it talks about lo tasu kol malacha, don't do any malacha, and it says by each you're going to get karet. So therefore, since each says karet, chava samalacha chayav shtei chataot, should be shtei not shnei, you're liable to korbanot chatat. Achal ochalin she'en ru'uyin la'achila, v'shatam mashkin she'enam ru'uyin l'shtiya. What if you ate and drank food and drink that wasn't edible, okay, or potable? V'shatat tzio or muwayis patul. If you ate fish brine or the fat that comes from the fish, none of that is considered food. You're exempt. Okay, so all these are exemptions to the rule. Gemara is going to start off, and this is going to be the main topic for today, although we'll get off on some tangents, some very, very important sugyot in today's daf, well, more so in the end of the daf, which we're in dapim right now. I just want you to know, especially if Talmud is new to you, these are very, what you call classic Gemara dapim, okay? These pages are really amazing pages full of lots of interesting things. I'll even tell you already that Shabbat's daf is a really interesting daf about feeding someone who's sick. I know not everybody, some people do the Shabbat daf on their own. So very worthwhile to listen. We're putting up on the site, it should be up, I think, today already, a shiur by Ayelet Libson, who's a professor of Talmud, who basically gives a whole interesting analysis of this topic of how you decide when one should eat on Yom Kippur or not. A really fascinating topic. There's a lot said on this topic. These are very, very famous issues. So it's good when we get to these pages, we've learned some esoteric pages. Here are the real basic pages that deal with lots of basic things. Today, we're going to get to number one. Our issue is, how do you know that it's whenever we have a punishment in the Torah, there always has to be also a place where it says, don't do this. It's not enough to just say, if you do this, you'll get punished. First, you have to see a pasuk that says, don't do this. Then you have to see a pasuk that says, if you do this, you will get this punishment. Ein onshin elim kemasirim. We don't punish unless we've warned you. Now, the problem is that there's no warning in the Torah for not eating on Yom Kippur. It never says, lo tochal, don't eat. So how can we punish you without a warning? So today, we're going to focus on trying to find a warning. Once we get through that, we're going to, toch kedei, because of the diyun and the sources they bring, we're going to get to this idea of, that the pasuk says in Yom Kippur, that you're supposed to on the 9th of the month. And what's this uniqueness of the 9th of the month? We're also going to learn about Tosefet Shabbat, Tosefet Yom Kippurim, very famous laws about the fact that we add on extra time to Yom Kippur and Shabbat and holidays. But this is why, for example, we just had a fast day. The fast day, if you notice, ends much earlier than Shabbat ends, because there's no issue of Tosefet on fast days other than Yom Kippur. But there is an idea of Tosefet, which means we add a few minutes before and a few minutes after. We start early, we end early. We end late in order to add on, and where that comes from. So these are all sorts of interesting issues that are going to come up throughout the discussion. Again, the focus of the discussion is really all about where do we have a warning that you can't eat on Yom Kippur. So Amar Rish Lakish, he takes it as a given that there's no warning, don't eat. He says, why not? So the first approach is to say, why isn't there? So he says, Mishum delo efshar. It's very simple. There's no way to do it. Why not? Hechi nichtav. How can we write it? Nichtav rachmana lo yochal. You could say, don't eat. That would be very simple. But achila b'kizayit. We already learned. This was yesterday's stuff. What did we learn? That shishina katuv b'mashma'an v'shinu chachamim b'shiuran. Right? The whole reason why we learned the shiur is different, the requisite amount is different, is because the Torah used a different language. The Torah used the same language and said, don't eat. Then we would have assumed don't eat is kazayit. And the Torah wanted to tell us don't eat is kikotevet, or at least some other shiur. And therefore, it had to change the wording. So it couldn't say don't eat. So now they say, what's the other option? Lo tu'unet. Don't. Let's use, if we don't want to use achila, let's substitute the word affliction, and let's write, don't be afflicted. Oh, well, that obviously doesn't work because that's the opposite of what we're trying to do. Kum echol mashma, right? And it's supposed to be, right? It sounds like if you say don't afflict yourself, it sounds like go get up and eat, which is the opposite of what we're trying to achieve. So you can't use, if you're going to use the word inoi, you can't use the reference of a lo ta'aseh. There's no way to say don't with affliction, because affliction is, you're supposed to do it. So he says that's why. But now we're going to have several questions against his assumption. And eventually we're going to knock out all the questions except for the last one. And the last one's going to stand and say, really, there was a way to do this. Be careful lest you don't afflict yourself. So there you have it, right? Be careful not afflict yourself. There you have hishamer. Pen is usually a language of lo ta'aseh. You can use the lo te'uneh here, so you get everything. But they say, what do you mean? In ken pishalu laving. Then you end up with hishamer is a lav, pen is a lav, and lo te'uneh would be a lav. And then we have 3 language of lo ta'aseh. You would end up liable for 3 negative commandments. We don't want that, so that won't work. So matkevla baby barabai. Nichtav rachmana hishamer b'mitzvat inui. Observe the mitzvah of inui. Hishamer is generally considered. Hishamer, observe, don't do something. That's why let's say zachor v'shamor. Zachor, we say, are the positive commandments of Shabbat, and shamor are the negative commandments. Shmirah is usually be careful not to do something. So hishamer b'mitzvat inui, that would be perfect. There's one lo ta'aseh, which is hishamer. It's used in connection with make sure to afflict yourself, and it would be perfect. No, not so. Because in Ken, hishamer de lav lav, hishamer de aseh aseh. It's known that when you have hishamer with a positive commandment, it means observe this positive commandment equals a positive commandment. Observe a negative commandment, hishamer, be careful not to do something, is a negative commandment. So you can't say hishamer b'mitzvat inui and then end up with it being a negative commandment. So, and that's all we're looking for is some sort of negative commandment, right? Some sort of phrase that says, don't do this. We can't get that there. So, final question, which I said is going to work. Where do we see al tasur? Al tasur min advarim asher yagidu l'chayim minusmal. Don't veer from what the rabbis tell you. Actually, I think it's lo tasur, but it's the same thing. Say, don't move away from afflicting yourself. So that would be a resolution. Then it would be perfect. Vikashya, right? They end kashya. This is in fact difficult. We don't know why they didn't say this. This would have been totally perfect resolution. And basically we start off with, and I counted this as number 1. We're going to count 5 sections of this sugya, okay? But really number 1 is different from all the rest. Number 1 is basically trying to say there's no way to have had a warning, and that's why there's no warning, okay? Kind of, we had no choice. Although we end with Akasha, really there was a choice. We don't really know why it didn't say that. Could have said Lotas Altas Romina Inu. But now we're going to bring 4, I told you there's 5 sections. So now we're going to start the first of the 4. 4 sections where each person, whether it's a Tana or an Amora, is going to bring a different source for how we learn that it's a negative commandment to eat on Yom Kippur, even though it doesn't say so explicitly in the Torah. So we're all now searching for a way to get to the Asara. And I'm going to warn you already, certainly the first one is going to be a little long-winded. It's going to take us a little while till we get there. We're going to quote a Braita, which actually seems to be part of a longer Braita even. You'll say, really, wow, this is already long to begin with. But we're going to learn all sorts of things till today, bringing this Braita. And then, like I said, from all the other answers, we're going to get into some other things as well. Tana Maita Lamehacha. So this Tana, the one we're going to see in a minute, brings it from here. But again, we're not going to get there yet, so hold on. Well, first of all, this is interesting. Some people say this is a verse in Bamidbar, okay, which says this explicitly. Some people say, and I think it makes a lot more sense, to say that it's actually referring to Vayikra, Kaf Gimel. I told you we're going to read these psukim, 27 to 30. I'll read them right now, and you'll see in a minute why the pasuk in Bamidbar says it straight. I'm sorry. Here it's a little bit split and it's in 2 different verses, and that's why maybe they preferred to go with the one in Bamidbar, but really it doesn't make sense to be quoting from there at all, because you'll see they don't really do so much with this verse, and this seems to be really the introduction to all the verses we're going to read now in Vayikra. So I'm just going to read through the psukim so you have a sense, because these are all the psukim we're going to darshan. I'm in 27, verse 27 of chapter 23 in Vayikra. On the 10th of the month, it's in Parshat Emor when it lists all the holidays. Yoma Kippurim hu mipar kodesh yelachem, it should be a holy day. V'ini temet nafshotechem. Okay, that's the first part we're going to read. And you should afflict your soul. B'krabtemi shel Hashem, you should sacrifice to God. B'chol malacha lo tasu. So you see that right now in the Gemara, they quote, they skip a few words and they move to the next verse, but these are kind of next to each other. Then it says, don't do malacha, be'etzem hayom hazeh, ki yom kippurim hu lechaper alechem mipnei Hashem Elokechem, because this day is the Day of Atonement, so don't do any work. Ki kol hanefesh asher lo tu'uneh be'etzem hayom hazeh, any soul who doesn't do this, who doesn't afflict oneself, v'nifrata me'ameh, will get karet. V'chol hanefesh asher taseh b'kol malacha be'etzem hayom hazeh, and anyone who does work on this day, v'ha'avadeti et hanefesh hi mikerav hama, which also means karet. So let's just review what we have here. We have one should afflict oneself, which, as we said already, is not a warning because it's framed in the positive. Then we have don't do malacha, okay, which is negative, right? You might say, why are they so careful? Negative, positive, right? We talk about this all the time, by the way. You talk about how to raise your kids, right? And everyone nowadays, it's all about positive language and not negative language, right? That there's something to be said whether you word something in the positive or you word something in the negative. Okay, now here it's the opposite. We're looking for negative, right? Whereas in life, we're always saying, you should speak to your children in a positive way, you should speak to people in general, right? Word things positively, if you have criticism, all that. Anyway, food for thought. So, number one, it says, you should afflict your soul, positive. Negative warning, don't do it. That's the Asara for Shabbat, don't do malacha. Then we move on to the punishments, right? Any nefesh that doesn't do this affliction will get karet, and anyone who does work on Shabbat will get karet. So we have two punishments, and we only have one warning, and we're missing the warning for affliction, and that's what we're looking for. So they quote those words. That's just kind of like the heading here. We're not really using those verses right now. That's why I think it makes sense to me, because you don't really see use of these verses. That's why to say it's quoting some pasuk in Bamidbar makes no sense. It seems to me that they're just quoting the beginning of this section where we're starting from. There's the aseh, there's the lo taseh, and how do we deal with it? They start off with this topic of tosefet, okay? And it seems that this is a continuation of some diyun they were having in the Braita. You might have thought you'll get karet for adding, if you don't, you do work in those extra minutes before and after. You might think you also got karet. Now they're going to focus on words that I wasn't focusing on when I read it. It says in the actual day itself, meaning that's coming to say just the day, not the tosefet. You don't get karet if the few minutes when when Yom Kippur starts and before it ends, if you do malacha or you eat, you're not going to get karet for it. Okay, first they're just talking about malacha. In a minute they're going to say the same thing for karet. So it says here, and you're not anush karet al tosefet malacha. So then they do the same thing for affliction. You might have thought, okay, you don't get karet if you do malacha, but maybe you will get karet if you eat in that extra time before and after. Talmud Lomar, no, also by the pasuk about affliction and the punishment, karet, it says be'etzem hayom hazeh. Ki kol hanefesh asher lo tu'uneh be'etzem hayom hazeh. If you don't afflict yourself on the essence of that day, right? Etzem hayom hazeh usually means the center of the day. Here we mean the whole day, but not the sides, right? The little bit before and after that we added. So therefore, we're going to say, okay, so because it says, and you get karet, so therefore we learn you don't get karet for tosefet, not for malacha, not for inoi, because each verse says be'etzem hayom hazeh. So fine, maybe you don't get punished, but maybe you are warned in the Torah against it. But no, look at the verse. Talmud Lomar, where it has the warning. Now, obviously, this is only going to be by malacha, because there is no warning by inor. That was verse 28. It said, don't do any malacha on that day. So there you have it, only during that day. So then they say, okay, fine. So you're not even warned not to do malacha. What about inoi? Maybe inoi, though, afflicting yourself, maybe if you eat on tosefet, it's still forbidden. Now, it's true you don't get karet, that we know, but maybe it's forbidden by the Torah law. Vidinhu, and it would be a kal v'chomer. Okay, a logical argument. What would you say? The answer is it's not because of logic. What's the logic? You're liable for malacha on Shabbos, on Yantif, all sorts of other days. And yet there's no tosefet. You're not warned not to do malacha on the tosefet. Inoi, she'eino noheg b'shabbatot v'yamim tovim, eino din shelo yehim mushar alav. So wouldn't we say then, inoi, which is only here on Yom Kippur. So that makes it weaker, right? Less stringent because it's only one day a year. So all the more so, we would assume you're not warned about it. Okay, so that's our logic. But now the Gemara says, but the fact is, we haven't even learned, and this is our problem. In Azharat, you're asking about Tosefet. Is there a warning against adding on to beginning and end? But what about the day itself doesn't even have a warning? So he says, Minayim, where do we get it from? Now, he doesn't say like Rish Lakish, there's no way. He's going to explain where we get it. So he says like this. Theoretically, the Torah could have left out part of these verses. Lo yomar onesh b'malach. It could have just not mentioned that you get punished karet by malacha, and we would have known it. Digamar mi inoi, because you can learn it from inoi. Why? Ma inoi, we just said. Inoi is less strict. Why is inoi less strict? Not eating, because it's only something for Yom Kippur alone, and as opposed to something that's already, we have a precedent for it in a lot of other places. So you would have said, Ma inoi she'eino noheg b'shabbatot v'yamim tovim anush karet, just like inoi, which you can't do, right? Which isn't relevant for Shabbat and Yom Tov, and yet you get karet for it. Melacha shenoheget b'shabbatot v'yamim tovim lo kol shekain. Wouldn't you assume then malacha all the more so? In which case, what? The whole verse that says, now obviously one could argue this logic, and the Gemara is actually going to break this logic. But even they're not going to say this isn't true. They're going to actually bring a different chumrah by inoi. But the point is, right, this is any kavach chomer. One could try to argue the logic, maybe because it's special for Yom Kippur, maybe that's why it has karet, maybe. But in general, since malacha has karet also in other things, you would assume it would have karet here, and therefore you would say lo kol shekain. Therefore, lama ne'emal. So the whole verse 30 is unnecessary. If you do malacha on Yom Kippur, you will get karet. We would have learned it from verse 29. If you eat, you get karet. So therefore, if you do this, you get karet. So lama ne'emar. So why is it said? It said mufne. It's actually unnecessary. In which case, it's there. It's extra. Lahakish v'ladu mimenu gzera shava. It's there to teach you. Notice verse 29 and 30 are very parallel. They both say if you do this, you get karet. If you do that, you get karet. It's true the words are a little different, but some of the words are similar. And therefore, we could say the reason why it's mentioned there is to say malacha. We're going to compare inoi, affliction, to malacha, to work. And then what's our tzera shava? Ne'emar onish b'inoi v'ne'emar onish b'malacha. Just like there, it has a punishment, and here it has a punishment. Ma malacha lo anash elin kenis heal. Just like by malacha, you won't get punished until there's a warning, and there is a warning in the Torah about it. Af inoi, even though there's no warning about it, elin ken, right? But inoi is the same. Lo anash elin kenis heal. So you're not going to find a direct warning, but the fact that it says by Shabbat you're going to get karet, that comes to teach you that just like you're warned, don't do malacha, you're also warned, don't eat. Okay, it's a way of using this extra pasuk, meaning in pasuk 30, which isn't talking about affliction at all, you really find an allusion to the affliction warning. Okay, that's from Gzera Shava. But the Gemara is going to say, no, that doesn't work. You can knock out that kavach chomer, because that's based on the fact that you don't need it to say a punishment by malacha, because you can learn it from inoi, you can learn it from a kavach chomer, and therefore it's unnecessary, and therefore we make Gzera Shava from there about the warning. But that's all based on this kavach chomer, which we can totally knock out. Mali inoi shelo hutar michlalo, tomar b'malacha shutar michlala. You could say, no, if I had just a pasuk telling me, you're going to get karet for not keeping affliction, the laws of affliction, you wouldn't necessarily know that you're going to get karet for malacha, because there's a heter for malacha that doesn't apply by the affliction. What is that? Very simple. On Yom Kippur, in the Beit HaMikdash, they would slaughter animals, right? They would do things. There's certain heterim about Shabbat that we know. You can do certain malachas on Shabbat for certain needs, but no one is allowed to eat. Now, it's true we saw the person who sends them seir. The seir mishtalech, he does get, he is allowed to, right? I shouldn't say he's allowed to, they offer him food. If you remember, we said he doesn't actually really do it. It's just to make him feel better. He doesn't really eat. It doesn't really seem to say he's allowed to eat. So therefore, what do you see? Inoi is never allowed, and malacha is allowed. So that makes Inoi more strict. Now, I know you're asking, and I saw that even I was going to mention this before you asked the question, but I see in the chat, you're asking about, what do you mean? There's all these heterim for affliction. So again, that goes back to our big debate. Are all the other afflictions deoraita or not? Some people say this is a good proof. Only food is usher from the Torah because we're only talking about food here. Okay. Alternatively, some of the ways we saw it, according to those who say everything is deoraita, we said those are not, you're not doing those for pleasurable reasons. Therefore, they're not considered that you're not afflicting yourself, right? It just doesn't even count, not considered richitzah, it's not considered tzikha, not considered if you're doing it for those reasons. So anyway, that's how we answer that question. Whereas you can't say, I didn't mean to shech the animal when I shechted the animal in the temple. I clearly did mean to do that, right? It wasn't, that's the actual isser. By Yom Kippur, it's to do it for pleasure. And you're not doing it for pleasure. If you're walking through to visit your rabbi, that's not for pleasure. You're going to see your rabbi. You're not trying to bathe in the water. So anyway, you can answer in both of those ways. So now, they say, so we basically shown that there's a chumrah this way, there's a chumrah that way, and therefore our kal chumras are a little bit tricky. But now, since they're saying, let's say it that way, that Ino is more chamor, so let's give a different option. Ella, lo yomar onesh be'inoi. If Ino is more strict, then why don't we say, okay, forget verse 30, that is necessary. Verse 29 isn't necessary. The verse that says, if you don't afflict yourself on that day, you will get karet. So, right, we're going to say, okay, so don't say that pasuk since that's more strict. And you're going to get karet for not doing work, for working, then obviously you're going to get karet for not afflicting yourself. So that's what we're going to read now. So ma malacha, so lo yomar onesh be'inoi the gamar malacha. Don't say it by ino because you can learn it from malacha. Ma malacha shu'utcha michala. Malacha we see is much easier. You can override it in certain cases, and yet anush karet. So therefore, ino shelo utar michala lo kol shekain. So ino, which there's no heter for. Therefore, you would say, well, the more so, it's going to get karet. So therefore, lama ne'emar. We're going to go through the same logic. So why is verse 29 there to tell you karet? It's really mufne. It's extra. Lahakish v'ladumi menu gzera Shabbat. Make it gzera Shabbat between Inoi and Shabbat. Again, Nemar onesh b'Inoi v'Nemar onesh b'Melacha. Just like both have punishments and one is extra, so we're going to say Ma Melacha anash v'Yisir, Af Inoi anash v'Yisir. Just like by Shabbat there was a warning about it. Likewise, we're going to learn from this extra verse 29 that there's a warning also by Inoi. But also that is going to be a problem. Ikal mifrach. Obviously, we're going to knock this out because of the logic we established originally, which is that Shabbat is more chamor. In other words, you could look at it. Shabbat's more chamor. I'm sorry, not Shabbat. I keep saying Shabbat. I just keep thinking it's Shabbat because it's malacha, which is forbidden on Shabbat. Doing work is more chamor because in other words, there's two sides to this kavachama. You can claim that's chamor, you claim that's chamor, and therefore there's no way, you can't do it either way because you can knock it out. So here's our response. Okay, we're still within answer number 2. Still trying to find, and it's really the first answer, right? It's after Rish Lakish, who said there is no warning. This is now trying to find a warning. We're still struggling within this first answer. Ravina is going to answer. Hi, Tana, etzem gama. Forget that the pasuk's extra and that pasuk's extra. No, you can't argue either logic. They're both necessary because one could knock out any kavachomer logic. By the way, I didn't raise this issue. It's a big issue. The Gemara's, the Braita's suggestion here is a ridiculous suggestion because there's a concept of einon shimin adin. You don't get punishments based on a kavachomer. You can't punish someone based on a logical argument. So the premise of this whole thing is actually difficult. I'm not going to get into it. I'm going to raise the question. Okay, there's answers about this, but I'm going to raise it as a question right now without answering. Amar Ravina, sometimes when there's questions like that, it's actually a very good question, but one could say anyway, we knock it out in the end anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Amar Ravina, hi Tana, etzem gama. He makes a gzera shava from the word etzem to etzem. What etzem? Not bone, but etzem hayom hazeh, which we said, right? It says if you do, right? We're going to end up making gzera shava between verses 29 and 30, but not because one is extra, right? And we didn't need to tell the punishment, but because the word etzem hayom hazeh, etzem hayom hazeh, the exact same words appear in both. We can make gzera shava. Mufne, and you would have to say that we really didn't need to tell you etzem hayom hazeh. Okay, maybe because it already appeared in verse 28, and maybe that's one. But you would have to say it's not necessary. Why not? Because ilo mufne, if it wasn't extra, there's a rule about Zera Shabbos. When you compare two verses, you can only do it if you can knock it out by a logical argument, but not if the word is totally unnecessary. If the word is totally unnecessary, then you can't. So therefore, we're going to have to assume the word was totally unnecessary. Otherwise, we could have knocked it out with all our problems that we just raised. So they say, not just are you claiming this, but lie. It really is unnecessary. Why? Because it says lo taseh kol malacha 5 times by Yom Kippur alone. So what are they all for? One is to tell you you can't do malacha at night. One is to tell you can't do malacha during the day. One is that those were both warnings. One is to say you get punished if you do malacha at night, and one is to say you get punished if you do malacha during the day. Why you would think to distinguish night and day? Good question. I'm going to leave that for right now. And then and then one is extra to teach you this whole thing. Now we're on our second answer for where we get Nasara from. He's also going to learn from Xer Shava, but from somewhere else entirely. Doesn't even tell you this in the pasuk, but Rashi says we're talking about Nara Muasa, a woman who's betrothed to someone. Betrothed doesn't mean engaged like we have it. We do kiddushin under the chuppah, so they did it about a year before. If somebody sleeps with a woman who is betrothed to someone else, it says there, Al davar asher ina et eshet re'eu. He, ina, this word inoi, afflicted the wife of his friend, and therefore he gets punished. And there's a warning and there's a punishment. Likewise, here we're going to say, okay, so we're going to learn the warning from there. Third answer, Rav Acha bar Yaakov Amar Yalav Shabbat Shabbaton Shabbat Breshit. It says here Shabbat Shabbaton by Yom Kippur. It says Shabbat Shabbaton by Shabbat. Mala halam lo anash elim kin. It's here when it comes to Shabbat. You always, right, there's a warning, don't do malacha, and there's a punishment. Afkan lo anash elim kin is here. So we're going to learn it from Xera Shava. So far, all our answers were Xera Shavas. This word, that word, right? So, Rav Papa Amal, who gufes Shabbat ikre. What do you mean? You don't need Xera Shava. He says, Yom Kippur is called Shabbat. Dichtiv tishbitu Shabbatchem. Okay, here's the whole verse because we're going to darshan it. Shabbat Shabbatoni lachem. V'ini tevet nafshotechem b'tisha lachodesh. You should afflict your soul on the 9th of the month. We're going to get back to that, what that means. Be'erev, and the evening. Me'erev ad erev, from evening to evening. Tishbitu Shabbatchem. Create a Shabbat. So there you have it. It says it's Shabbat, which means Shabbat, you were warned. Here you were warned. You don't even need Xera Shabbat. It says it explicitly. To which the Gemara says, well, that's a good answer. I understand why he didn't use this Shabbat Shabbaton Xera Shava. You'd rather pick a direct verse than try to say, oh, let's learn it from Xera Shava. So Rav Papa has a better answer. But Ella Rav Acha bar Yaakov, my time alone, Mark Rav Papa. Why didn't Rav Acha bar Yaakov say like Rav Papa? So because he needed those words to for the following drasha. Here we get into another whole topic. As I said, through our discussion, we're going to get into something else entirely, which is he needs that verse for something else, and that's why he doesn't use it to teach this halacha of the azhara, the warning. Sounds like you should start fasting on the 9th because it says on the 9th of the month. Now, Yom Kippur comes out on the 10th of the month. So Tamulomar ba'erev says in the evening, meaning toward the end of the day of the night. Well, it says ba'erev, you might have thought it means nighttime, meaning start the fast on the 10th. Well, then Tamulomar b'tisha, then why does it say 9th? It should say 10th. Doesn't make any sense. It's a very strange verse. HaKetzad, so how does it work? This is the source for Tosefet. In fact, what we learn is the main source for Tosefet doesn't come from Shabbat. You might have thought it was Tosefet Shabbat, adding on to Shabbat. From there, we learned all the holidays. No, the real source is this pasuk. Start from the 9th in the evening. Add on to Yom Kippur. Okay? Wait, so that means add on ba'erev, meaning the night before. So it teaches you have to bring in Yom Kippur early, but what about ending it late, right? And when you end it, well, how do we know you have to add on more? Talmud Lomar, me'erev ad erev. It's from evening to evening. That's what it tells you. It's telling you the Tosefet is both this evening and the next evening. I'm going to change the words based on some of the guys on the side said to change the words. Shabbatot minayin. So fine, that teaches us by Yom Kippur. How do we know about Shabbat? Talmud Lomar, and here we get to why he needed the word Tishbetu Shabbatchem. Tishbetu comes to tell you this law of adding on is also true for Shabbat. And we have a Shabbat, Yamim Tovim minayin. So where do we get all other Yom Tovs? Talmud Lomar Shabbatchem. So Tishbetu Shabbatchem comes to take the law of Tosefet and adds it on to Shabbat, adds it on to Yom Tov. That's why he can't use it to learn our halacha, because it's needed for the Sabbath Rasha. HaKetzad. How do we get it from Shabbatchem to Yom Tov? Because Kol Makom Shneimar Shvot Mosifim Michol HaKodesh. Even though holidays aren't called Shabbat, but they are commanded Shvot, stop doing malacha. So therefore, the Shabbatchem comes to include those as well. Now they go back to the first time. In the first answer that we saw, Ditana Etzem Hai B'Tisha L'Chodesh My Avidle. He says Etzem comes to teach you that you're not warned on Tosefet. So what does he do with this pasuk if he doesn't learn Tosefet from here? He needs it for the following thing. And now we're going to learn a totally different halacha about the ninth. And there's a whole different way of reading that verse. One is to say the ninth is mentioned to teach you the laws of Tosefet Shabbat, right? First Tosefet Yom Kippur, from there to Shabbat, from there to Yom Tov. He learns this totally different. Why the ninth? It's the 10th. Anyone who fasts on the ninth, anyone who eats food on the ninth, if he fasts on the ninth of the 10th. This is a fascinating halacha. Why does a mitzvah, right? There's some people who make sure to have food in their mouth all day long. What's the idea here? There's at least three different explanations. Gefet this week, Rabbanit Yael Shimoni, it'll be up sometime later today. She talks about really like in depth about this whole machloket. So fascinating, you should listen. And if your Hebrew's good, anyway, the idea here is there's three possibilities. Either eat to prepare yourself for the fast, it kind of makes your fast better, more meaningful, because you're not suffering as much. Second answer, the opposite. You suffer more if you eat more before. So it'll be harder for you to fast the next day, right? These are two different approaches about whether it's better to eat a lot the day before a fast or better not to eat so much to get your body used to not eating so much and to afflict yourself more. And some people say, Yom Kippur is a holiday and we're missing the meal. So the meal you're makayim the day before, okay? Either which way you look at this, I actually think it's very interesting because I think what it's showing is, right, Masechet Yoma, Ha-Yom, and it's all about this one day a year. It's a way of extending that one day. It's more. There's preparation involved. There's thought that has to go into Yom Kippur. You can't just go into Yom Kippur. We all know this without some thinking about things. You can't just, boom, my busy life, and then boom, right into Yom Kippur. So it's this way of taking the day before as a day of preparation. We all know, most of us, at least Erev Yom Kippur, it's a bit of a different nature than your regular everyday chol, whether you're eating all day or you're not eating all day. It's just you're getting ready for Yom Kippur. So there's something to be said for that. Okay, moving on. Aval ochalin she'em ru'yim la'achila. So, I'm sorry, achal ochalin she'em ru'yim la'achila. Eat something that you can't, it's not food. Amarava. So here are some examples. Kas pilpula b'yom kippur patur. You chew on peppercorns. Kas zangvila. You chew on ginger. B'yom kippur patur. You're exempt. Meitivet. The Gemara brings a contradiction. Hey, Rabbi Meir omer mimashma shenema ve'orla ve'araltem orlato et period. This is the halachas of orla. 3 years, you're not allowed to use the fruits on your tree. Of course, it means a fruit tree. It says period. But earlier in the verse, it says eitz ma'achal. It's a fruit tree. So why is it saying fruit tree and then saying fruit? Elamata mulomar eitz ma'achal. So why does it say fruit tree? It's talking about a fruit tree whose branches taste like the fruit itself. What is that? And there's laws of orla also by them, meaning they are considered fruits. They are considered food. So it's chayiv in orla. If it's chayiv in orla, then it's food. So how could you say you eat it on Yom Kippur, you chew it, you're not liable? Ve'ein Eretz Yisrael, this is just the end of Braita, Chaserach Klum. Israel has everything in it, meaning it has even these unique trees where the branches taste like the fruit itself. Shneimar lo techsar kol ba. Okay, there's nothing lacking in Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara answers, lo kasha b'letiv tahavi yaveshka. Depends whether they're moist or dry. Once they're dried out, then it's not considered eating. When they're still moist from the tree, they're considered a fruit. Same thing we're going to have with zangvia, with the ginger. Amalei Ravina Limeremar, Bahama Rav Nachman, Hi Himlita, which is ginger mixed with sweet stuff. Da'ate, you chop it up and you mix it with sweet things. Da'ate midei hunde, it's from India that they would eat it. Like this, sharia, it should be allowed. This is, you can eat it even if Gentiles make it. It's not bishul akum because you can eat it raw, things that you can eat raw. You're not liable for a non-Jew cooking for you. Which shows this is clearly food. So how can you say chewing ginger is not? Lo kasha b'retiv tabi yaveshta. Same answer. This is moist. This is dry. Okay. Tanu Rabbanan. Achala lekanim. You eat leaves of reeds. Patur. That's not food. Lulavek panim, but the shoots that come out from the grapevine, chayav. Eluhem lulavek panim. What are they? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Megdala. Kosher livlavu me'rosh shana v'ad Yom Kippur. Those that sprouted between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, they're fresh sprouts. Rav Kana Amar Kosh Loshim Yom, every 30 days. Tani Kavatei Rabbi Yitzchak Megdala. We have a proof from a Braita. Achala lekanim patur lulavek panim chayav. And Eluhem lulavek panim kosher livlavu me'rosh shana v'ad Yom Kippur. His definition appears in that Braita. That's a source. Okay, last thing for today, Shatatzir Umurayis Patur. Ha-chometz chayav. This seems to imply those, the fish brine and the fish fat, but vinegar would be allowed. I'm sorry, you'd be liable. It would be considered food. Manitimani, who does this hold like that says vinegar is, you're liable on Yom Kippur for drinking? Rebbe, he detanya Rebbe, Omer chometz mishiv. She said, if you drink vinegar, it returns your soul. That would be like Yishuv Hadat. That would be the opposite of afflicting. Darash of Gido Bar Menashe Miveri Dinarish. Great story to end with. He says this drasha, Ein halakha ki Rebbe. We don't hold like Rebbe. He gets up and teaches everybody. We don't hold like Rebbe. Vinegar is not forbidden. What happens? Lishana, next year Yom Kippur comes around. Nafke kuleyama mazgo b'shatu chala. Obviously a bit of an exaggeration, but everybody goes out and drinks vinegar on Yom Kippur. Well, let's see Rav Gidl's reaction. Shama Rav Gidl ve'ikpid. He hears and he says, gets really angry. Good question. Is he angry at himself or angry at the people? It's a really good question, something to think about. Amal, he says to them, I didn't say you should go out and do it. I said you won't be liable, you won't get curried for it, but I didn't say go do it. I said if you happen to have accidentally done it, okay, it's not a big deal. I said a little bit. I didn't say go drink cups full of vinegar. I was talking about raw vinegar in its raw form. Mazug mi amra. I wasn't talking about diluted. You went and you diluted. You drank all this wine. You did it lechatchila. That wasn't what I meant, right? And this is a classic problem of be careful what you say and how people are going to understand it. And you always have to watch your words. So good question. Was he angry at himself or angry at them for not listening properly or him for not expressing clearly enough? Always as a teacher, right? Always the problem. You want to make sure you express yourself as well as possible so that people don't misunderstand. Okay. Have a great day, everyone.